and good art teachers from all over the world. Okay, welcome to MNT again. This is the third day of the research paper writing workshop. Okay, for the first two workshop was such engaging and fruitful events that we all MNT team member will be proud of. I also believe today's workshop will also be fruitful as ever before. That's why now may I invite to our honorable and well-informed speaker, Dr. KKX. Chair, if you're ready, okay, you can start. Chair.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and paying attention to what I'm going to say. What we have done so far is we have looked at literature review, right? We have looked at the process of research writing and literature review, conducting literature review and writing literature review, and also the structure of chapter, right? Now, what we are going to look at today will be methodology, writing methodology. Now, let's start. Or would you like to wait for a short while? Okay, start with the very first slide. No, we need to go to the very first slide. Okay, now. Okay, now, so far what we have done is literature review, and the next chapter, the next section that we normally write is the methodology section. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, then in that case, what shall we look at tonight, or what is a research methodology section or chapter? Now, here in this case, I think in the question that were raised by the participants, right? They would like to know differences between research design, methodology, and method. I will just go to it very, very briefly. Okay. A research design refers to choices you made in terms of the methodology and method that you will use to address your research question. Or in a way, we can say that it's the blueprint of the study, it's the framework that has been created to seek answer to the research question that you have raised. Okay. Now, another one is a methodology. It's an approach to the process of the research, encompassing a body of methods that you use for the study. And method is a technique or a tool, right? Okay. Here you can see some example. In the next slide, you can see some example of research design. The research design normally describes the study type, whether it's descriptive or correlational or semi-experimental or experimental or meta-analysis. I just try to give some example, and this can be divided into some subtype, descriptive longitudinal case study, for example. And also, it also includes the research question hypotheses, independent and dependent variables, if we are, as you can say, carrying out the quantitative research, okay? Now, here in this case, this is what Creswell said, right? The researcher need to consider the issue of concern to be addressed carefully and the research design that best matches the problem that we're looking at. Now, his or her skills or experience and assess, because actually, even if he or she would like to conduct the research using the so-called popular method or design, right? What we need to do, it must match well with his or her skills and experience and assess which approach best complement these. And also, we also need to consider the audience to whom findings from the research will be addressed as well. So these are all what we need to consider. Now, just go back to what our main section is. What is research methodology section? In terms of what it provides, question it answered, language used in this section, and its significance. Now, let's move to the next slide. Now, here in this case, methodology section provides you need to be very careful, enough information so that the experiment or the research that you conducted could be repeated by others to evaluate whether the results are reproducible. And another one is the audience can also judge whether the results or finding and conclusions are reliable and validity. Because the essence of the research is its reliability and validity. That's why your methodology section will be able to prove that, they are reliable and valid. The next slide. Now, two questions that in that sense, right? No, previous slide. The two questions that methodology section trying to answer: how was the data collected or generated, and how was the data analyzed? That's why your research question need to provide that information. Okay, now the next one, the next slide, please. Now, here, the language we use, right? It is very direct and precise and unambiguous, right? If it is in the research report or dissertation, because we are reporting the research that we conducted in the past, that's why it is written in the past, then it can be active or it can be passive. But if you are doing it for the research proposal, because you haven't conducted the research yet, that's why it is written in the future symbol, whether it's active or passive. Next slide, please. And why it is important? Because, as I mentioned to you before, that section provide the information by which a study's reliability and validity is judged. Okay. Now, here in this case, now, why it is significant? The why is the explanation of methods of data collection and analysis significant or important? Because it shows and justifies appropriateness of the chosen methodology in fulfilling the overall aim of the study. For example, in terms of sample size, generalizability of the results. Okay. Now, the next one, it shows that your methodology ensures the reliability of your result and the value of your interpretation of the finding as well. Now, another one here, the first one is appropriateness, right? The second one is reliability of your results. The next one is providing sufficient information or methodology allows other researchers to adopt or replicate your methodology, especially when you develop a new method or you use the existing method innovatively. In such a case, your session will allow other researchers to adopt or replicate your methodology. Now, it also shows that the data was collected or generated in such a way that is consistent with accepted practice in the field of study, that we will talk about this ethical concern later. Another one is state the problem that were anticipated and the step that you took to prevent them from occurring. Because research is not a kind of smooth journey, right? In some cases, then maybe you may have already expected some problems occurring, or sometimes, the problem that you have never anticipated may come. That's why in that case, you need to state all the problems that were anticipated and the step you took to prevent them from occurring. And for any problem that do arise, you must describe the ways in which they were minimized or why these problems do not impact in any meaningful way your interpretation of the findings, okay? That's why this is very important. Now, if you look at the introduction now, here, these are the components of the research methodology session. One is introduction of overall methodological approach. The second one is indication of how this approach fits the overall research design, in a way, justification, a background and rationale for methodology that are unfamiliar for your readers. Another one is specific data collection method or methods and analysis of data. And finally, we have justification of the subject selection and sampling procedure. And after that, potential limitations. Okay, now when you look at the introduction of the overall methodological approach, it can be qualitative or it can be quantitative. If you are using a mixed method, it means the combination of the qualitative and quantitative methods. Now, indication. Now, here in this case, what you need to say is that now, I have already told you in the previous session as well. research is all about choice that you make. But what you need to do is you need to justify your choice. That's why here in this case, you need to show that there is a clear connection between your research method and your research problem. And you need to show that your method should clearly be able to address the problem that you would like to handle. Okay. Now, when you look at the background and rationale for the methodology that are unfamiliar for your readers, you need to provide the background to that methodology as well, if it is not that common or something like that. Now, another one is in terms of you need to indicate specific data collection method. For example, if it is qualitative one, it doesn't matter, survey, interview, questionnaire, observation method, or archival research. If it's archival, describe how that document was originally created or gathered and by whom. Okay. Now, another one is when you also need to indicate how your data is analyzed. Now, if you look at the example here, right, this is the example from some of the articles, but it is not the chapter, but from the research paper. If you look at it here, the study employed a mixed method research design comprising two phases with qualitative and quantitative elements in each phase. Phase one employed a triangulation convergence model, whereby quantitative and qualitative approaches were used to explore strategy with which school and parents supported first grade children's English reading and the nature of homeschool relations. Phase two employed an embedded quasi-experimental design, whereby quantitative approaches were used to determine the effectiveness of PR and HR, and the qualitative approaches were used to better understand the practical value of HRPs from the point of view of parents. So if you look at it here, it also explains in the use of the you can say method and what that method trying to you can say find out. Okay, now here when you look at it here with regard to participant and samples, number one question that you can just ask yourself and answer in writing that who were the participants and how many of them were there in the study. Now, here in this case, why was this sample selected in light of the research goal? Why these people are selected? How was that sample obtained, recruited, and selected? Okay, these are the questions that you try to answer and put it down in writing. What are the demographic characteristics of the sample, for example, in terms of gender, in terms of age, ethnicity, whenever it is relevant, race, socioeconomic status, for example? What if any inclusion and exclusion criteria were involved? Okay, for example, selection rules to obtain participant, right? Only when you have the proper selection criteria, that means inclusion and exclusion criteria, then we can say for sure that you have had the appropriate participant. Okay, sample. How many of these participants recruited actually participated in the study? Why? This is one of the difficulties, right? Normally, we do not, even if you have already recruited, for example, 100 participants, it doesn't mean that all 100 participants will participate in your research, okay? That's why you need to just, report how many you have recruited and how many really joined your research, okay? Now here, that is the example of sampling. You can have a look at it, right? Here, if you look at it here, the primary aim of phase one was to identify a school in which ARPS could be meaningfully implemented in phase two from a sampling frame of 113 budget private school in economically deprived inner city areas. Okay, as stratified random sample. This is the sample, right? How they chose it. 30 schools were selected to be surveyed. 6 of the 24 schools which had completed the survey agreed to participate in the HBR. Now, I would like you to have a look at and read it. Now, if you look at it here, the last paragraph shows, in a way, kind of criteria. The school was selected for the following reason. Parents claim to have a relatively sufficient command of English to enable both PR and HR2 to be implemented. 2, the school did not have a history of active parental involvement, a situation that was likely to introduce bias to the finding. Okay, let's move to the next one. Now, we have different content for quantitative and qualitative one. That's why if you are taking the quantitative one, we need to look at participant who was in the study, procedure in the chronological order. What happened in the study? You need to describe. And measures and material. That means source of the actual data or how the construct. The construct means the one that you would like to explore. For example, customer satisfaction. That is the construct that you are going to look at. And variable of interest were measured. What does it mean? For example, if you think that you can say the English proficiency of the customer service, you can say staff, have the kind of related to the customer satisfaction. And in that case, you would like to look at the construct that you would like to look at is customer satisfaction. Okay. One of the variables, okay, will be the proficiency of English of these customer service staff, for example. Okay. Now, what measures were used, like surveys? Okay. Now, or what materials like special lab equipment to find out, okay? Now, this is the measures of materials to collect the data. And about data analysis, how data were analyzed. These are what you need to include. Next one. In terms of design, you can say the question here, what is the design and how does it relate to the goals of the study? How were participants assigned to conditions? It was experimental research. What kind of conditions, participants were assigned to? Or are all the participants assigned to the conditions? Why were these conditions critical to address the question of interest? That is very, very important, right? Because actually it must be related to the research question again. If you look at it here, 300 participants completed this study online through Amazon Mechanical Turk in exchange for 50 cents. I included, $50. I included several reading and comprehension checks to ensure participant engagement and to prevent automated responses. The sample was restricted to US citizens. This is the inclusion criteria. 85% of participants reported full-time employment at the time of survey, and 73% said they had a college degree or higher. Maybe these are the kind of inclusion criteria. Now move to the next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, now here design and procedure. Now when you talk about design and procedure, you need to begin with recruitment into study, how you recruit these participants. Or arrival for study means if you are interviewing people or even if you ask them to take the survey, how, and conclude with debriefing. You need to describe everything from the beginning to the end. Now, how do you do that? There are questions you can answer. Where was the study conducted? In a way setting. What was the chronological sequence of event that participant experienced? Even if it's experimental research, even if it's in the lab, right? What kind of mental condition they have, etc. What are the things that they are asked to do, etc. Where participants run individually or in groups. Sometimes we have that. Whenever we have the interview start, it can be one-to-one interview or it can be a focus group interview. That's why whether it's individual or in group. How long did the participation take? If it is interview, how long was it? Is it 30 minutes? Is it 1 hour, etc.? How was the topic or study introduced to the participant? Now, this one is very important because, again, it is related to the research ethic, right, issue, okay? Because actually the thing here is that participants must be aware of what they are doing. Okay, what instructions were provided? Everything need to be included. How were independent variables manipulated? Okay, Now, in the quantitative approach, we have dependent and independent variables. Independent, okay, that's why I think here, how were independent variables manipulated? How were subject and dependent variables measured? In what order were measures and other tasks completed? What procedure checks were completed to avert potential sources of bias in implementation or the manipulation and assessment? Here, I would like to explain, but we do not have that much time. Only when we have the kind of separate session for research methodology, not writing, right? In the writing session, I cannot explain I cannot explain that much, okay? Design and procedure here. If you look at it here, this is the example of how this structure. You can read it on your own. because it describes the chronological order of, actions that the participant need to take place and what the researcher did. Okay. Now, here, this is the example of data analysis. I recruited 2 independent raters to analyze the content of the participant open-ended responses. I asked the rater to categorize participant response as advice to accept anxiety, to hide anxiety, or to reappraise anxiety as excitement, calmness, anger, or sadness. The raters were blind to that, means they do not know my experimental hypotheses and experimental condition, and iterator reliability was high. Okay, because this is what they needed. Now, when you look at it here, right, as you can see very clearly, describe everything that you will present to or you presented to participant, including the questionnaire and tasks. Sometimes it is not possible for you to include the whole questionnaire, then you can put them in the appendix. Describe the construct assessed if it's in the quantitative research, psychometric properties of measurements. Sometimes you may need to use the, you can say, lab or studio, let's say, especially when you would like to measure the anxiety. Mention any special equipment that was used in conducting the study and provide the technical specification. Even if you record the data, what is the brand of the recorder, all the configuration, okay? Now, here again, right? What will the question to answer again? How were the construct of interest assessed? What are the relevance, reliability, and validity data from previous research that support the use of these measures? Were multiple measures and methods used to assess the same construct? Was any special equipment used in the study? Okay, the next slide. Now, here, this is the example of the experimental research in a way. So you can say that performance, 3 classes of employee behaviors were measured, including performance of organizational citizenship behavior that have a specific individual as the target OCBI, along with those that focus on primarily benefiting. But the thing here is that for some of you, if you are not familiar with that, you may not be able to see it very clearly, but when you have time, when you go through it, you will be able to see some example. And if you have, then you will get some example to follow. Now here, right, this is about this. 2 research instruments were used in the attitudinal assessment. Each is discussed briefly. And you have 2, organizational commitment questionnaire, and another one is job descriptive index, JDI. Okay, and each is explained and described properly. Okay. Now, in terms of analysis, depending on knowledge of your intended audience, your choice of analysis must be grounded in literature as well. Now, here, coding, right? It is more to do with the qualitative research, right? For highly involved coding scheme, describe how the coding scheme was developed, how coders were trained, who were the coders, and how many. And report iterator reliability, as in the previous example, and scaling or data reduction. This is when I think we need to talk, regardless whether it's qualitative or quantitative, something we need to also do that kind of scaling. Used when developing a skill or reducing questionnaire item to a more manageable number for analysis. Describe the items on and report psychometric metrics for each skill as well, right? These now for the time being, okay, with regard to qualitative one, we can use the software for the coding and everything. Now, limitations. Now, because actually you can see very clearly that we also need to include the limitations. What our research can cover and what our research did not cover. So here in this case, you can see how the researcher indicated or you can see justify or discuss the limitation of that study. Okay. Now, here, what we have done so far is more to do with the quantitative research. Now, with regard to qualitative research, how did you go about your research? What overall strategy did you adopt and why? What design and techniques did you use and why those and not others? Again, You make choice and you need to justify your choice. The strategy of inquiry you use, researcher background, beliefs, and biases. For example, when someone is, and my PhD student was looking into the parental involvement, he himself at that time was a principal, school principal. That's why he had to indicate his background, beliefs, and biases as well to make sure. Okay, now this is in quantitative one, reliability and validity, but in qualitative one is totally different. That's why you need to indicate the background, beliefs, and biases and context of the study, whether it's inside the school compound or outside the school. And who are the participants? Sampling technique, how these you can say participants were recruited. Okay, instrument you use in the study, that means whether you are using interviewing or observation or anything like that, and procedure of the study. That's why you need to indicate the chronological order of all the action and everything that your participant went through or you went through. Okay, and data analysis, and here we do not use reliability and validity, we use trustworthiness. Okay, so I think now in terms of content qualitative one, identify the strategy of inquiry you have used, whether you're using ethnography approach, case study, in-depth understanding of a single case, or that can be multiple cases as well. In the case of my PhD student, he used the case study, but he used multiple cases. And phenomenology or grounded theory or narrative approach. One of my former colleagues, she used the narrative approach. Okay, now justify why it is the most appropriate one, and specific paradigm associated with your design, and describe the characteristic of the design, citing sources when needed. As I mentioned to you, you need to justify your choice, and when you justify it, you need to justify with evidence from the sources. Okay, now in terms of researchers' background, belief, and biases, what are your background and experience? How are these related to what you studied? That is very, very important in this case of qualitative research. In terms of context of study, where the study took place, the details of the population or community that you studied. Okay, the next one, who your participants are or where, and their demographic information. Are they the older generation, the age group, and gender, etc., ethnicity, as long as it is related to the research question. The sampling method and sampling procedure, whether it's purposive, opportunistic, volunteer, etc. Sometimes you have the snowballing. Sometimes in case when the data recruiting participants is very, very difficult, then you try to get the one participant and make friends and ask whether there are some people like the background, and try to get one after another. That is snowballing. Okay, now another one is justify why they are the most appropriate source of data, how you obtain permission from the participants and or the administration. Mention the consent form here and attach it at the end as attachment. All right, this one we're going to talk about it when we talk about ethical concerns. Okay, now what the assembly technique is about intensity, homogeneous, criterion, snowball, like what I random, purposive, why it is appropriate, number of participants, and why it is sufficient. As I mentioned to you, you need to justify your choice. Okay, now the next slide, please. Now, in terms of content, right, instrument used in the study, right? If you are using an existing instrument, you need to indicate very clearly where you got it from and why you use it. Again, justify your choice. If you are adapting, that means you modify it to suit your purpose. When you're adapting an already existing instrument, again, you said where you got it from and your justification for adaptation or modification, and present credibility of your you can say revision of that existing instrument. And if you are using your own instrument, you need to include all the details of the process of development and present its credibility. Okay, now procedure of the study. As I mentioned to you, you need to include the chronological presentation of each step, where and how you collected data, and you need to indicate the type of data you collect. For example, whether it's audio data, or the text data or artifacts. And here you also need to indicate the data collection strategy, whether it is interview or observation or participant observation or document analysis or focus group interview or something like that. State very clearly. And whom you interacted with this interview and how long. The action you took and what participant did as well during the process of data collection. Now, in terms of data analysis, how you analyze your data, what technique you use, and how you use them. For example, coding, sorting, synthesizing, and theorizing, or code, categories, themes, and theory, and how your research questions are addressed or were addressed. Now, here in this case, as I mentioned, we have quite a lot of, for example, one software that I can mention is NVivo, but this is a paid one, but we also have the free software on the internet. Okay, now another one is trustworthiness. As I mentioned to you, with quantitative one, we have reliability and validity. Now, under qualitative one, we need to include the trustworthiness. First thing, you need to make sure your, credibility to show your credibility of your, you can say technique or measurement. What is measure is what you intend to measure. Use a well-established method and triangulation. This one is more to do, I think, similar to the validity of the quantitative research. Transferability, that is, other researcher can replicate what you have done. Now, dependability or reliability, okay? All these need to indicate, and here, this is one example. This ethnographic study involved 4 Chinese families in 2 different neighborhoods in a university town in Western Canada. The 4 family included 2 academic family, the Lee family and Chen family, with the fathers being graduate student in the local university and 2 entrepreneur family, the Yi family and the Liu family, who operated restaurant business in an inner city neighborhood. That is the context of study and also the participant. Next slide, please. Now here, another example, okay? You can see very clearly they provide the, as you can say, demographic of the, as you can say, the participant, okay? And they also include the, you can say, sampling method and everything. Okay, now here, sample and data collection. The initial sample for this study comprised 461 full-time employees of various organizations from a Midwestern city who were attending evening MBA classes at local university. This sample was approximately 2/3 male, 313 males, 147 females, 1 missing value, with an average age of 30 years and average salary. Now you can see very clearly here, they include the demographic of all the participants without including the name, okay? Now, in terms of analysis, this is the sample example. The interview transcript were reviewed, coded, and analyzed semantically according to the common issues and patterns that emerged. Field notes were carefully studied and examined to support and elaborated upon the interview data. Contextual influence were identified and 2 main categories emerged. Parents' perception of and beliefs about their children's multi or bilingual development, and parental involvement and investment in the children's literacy development in home and school settings, okay? Now, if you look at it here, right, this is how they analyze the data, and they also include the themes of the code and everything. Now, let's look at ethical concern. Let's have a look at the video, right? When writing a methodology, right, the researchers need to adhere to all these, you can say professional standard of practice. Okay, let's watch the video. It is a bit old, but still useful. I'm not quite sure whether people can hear the sound. Can anyone hear the sound?
No.
No.
Okay, I think they, at least, you can see it. And it seems like I need to explain it again. Sorry. Okay, I think we'll just go back to the PowerPoint slide. I hope that even if you can't hear, you can read what is there. So I think you can get some idea. Now, whenever you write a methodology section, researcher must adhere to ethical norms to ensure trust, accountability, mutual respect, and fairness in addition to conducting the research. Next slide. As you can see very clearly, that every university and college has the ethic committee, research ethic committee. So whenever your research data collection involves human participant, this is where I think you need to have the ethical clearance from the ethics committee before you collect the data, right? In order for you to get their clearance, you need to do all the, you can say, all the necessary procedure. For example, right, this, whenever, for example, I just try to give one example. The right to privacy of the individuals involved. What does it mean? Because all the participant personal information and everything must be private and confidential. That's why in the process of data collection and data analysis, and also when you report your research finding, these personal information and everything must be kept in confidential and private. In order for you to do so, when you record it, or even in your file and everything, you need to use the pseudonym name, for example, participant P1, P2, P3 without their name. Okay, now another one is the nature of participation in the research must be voluntary, and the individual involved must have the right to withdraw partially or completely from the process. Okay, that is what we need to do, because actually, right, all participants must provide their consent first. Now, the process is like this. Okay, I will just go through it very quickly, because in order for you to be able to collect data from, let's say, school students and children and something like that, the first one is you need to get the consent or the approval of the school principal, for example, and all the participant consent, maybe teachers or students. If the students are underage, you also need to get the consent of the parents and the students themselves. Okay, now how do you do that? You need to document. One is research information statement, whereby you indicate very clearly what the research is about, what are the procedures involved, and how long the procedure take place. And you need to state very clearly and the benefits that you can get, the student can get, students or the school can get by participating in the research, etc. Okay, and you also need to state very clearly that participation in the research is totally voluntary, and the individual has the right to withdraw from the research partially or completely. Okay, that's why I think you need to include all the information in the research information statement. And there is another document, we call it consent form, right? Consent forming, this is where I think the participant need to state very clearly that they agree, they provide, they give the consent, and to the researcher to use the information that they provide in their research. But the thing here is that they know that they have the right to withdraw at any time, and then you are promised to have the kind of that your personal information to keep as private and confidential, etc. Okay, these are the two documents, and then it is called signed consent form. After looking at it, the participant need to sign there to show that they agree or they consent you to use the information, for example, that you collect from the research, and you keep everything. Okay, now another one is this. Another one is here, maintenance of the confidentiality of data, right, provided by individual as well as identifiable participant anonymity. I have already explained to you, but with regard to the data, the researcher need to state very clearly in the at the clearance form that, let's say, for example, the data and all the information is accessible only to the researcher and the supervisor, and the file is secure with the password, etc. Something like that. They need to make sure that how the confidentiality of data is maintained. Okay. Now, another one is how participants react to the researcher method in seeking to collect data. You need to include that, how the participant will be affected, because it's, as I mentioned to you, in the research information statement, you need to include everything. How the participant will be affected by the way in which data is analyzed and reported. Okay, now the researcher also need to make sure that this information is only for academic purpose, and also maybe possible academic, you can say, publication and things like that. Now, also we need to include that as well. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that you have some idea about writing methodology. Okay. I think we're going to look at, after looking at methodology, I think only at the end of this, you can say, section, we're going to have the question and answer section. I think we can move to the result section. The next one.
Yes, Chair.
Ethical clearance is very important for you. That's why I think you need to prepare it very well. Okay. The next one. Okay. Writing results or finding section, because result is, I mean, people used to say that results are meant for the quantitative study and findings are meant for a qualitative one. It doesn't matter. Let's move to the next slide. Now, what will we look at? What is the result of findings section and the content of that section and do's and don'ts? Okay, let's move. The next slide. What is the result of finding section? Next slide. Okay, here it summarizes, okay, be careful, summarizes and present the finding of the study to put them in context with your research question. It means that only your data is central here. Okay, now it is where you report the finding of your study based on the methodology or methodologies you apply to gather information. It is where the finding of research arranged in a logical sequence without bias or without any interpretation yet, okay? Only purely the result of finding. It is particularly necessary if your paper includes data generated from your own research, right? The result section necessary. Finding may be reported in a written text, tables, graphs, or any other kind of illustration, okay? Now, the result section of the research paper tells the reader what you found, why, because we would like to differentiate between results and discussion, because some of the researchers are not clear about it. That's why they mix everything. Okay. Now here in this case, the result section of the research paper tells the reader what you found, while the discussion section tells the reader what your findings mean. The results section, okay, be careful, summarizes collected data and analysis performed, while the discussion section examines, evaluates, and interpret the implication. Okay, so in that case, the result section should present the fact in an academic and unbiased manner, avoiding any attempt at analyzing or interpreting the data. It's said, in other words, we can say that the results section set the stage for the discussion session by making all the necessary information known to the reader first before they move to the discussion section, right? But be careful, it is not uncommon for these sections to be combined. In some cases, whenever we would like to do that, right, we have the heading. Whenever we indicate the result of finding, we have the heading, for example, according to the theme, we arrange it. And under that heading, we have the subsection, result, and another subsection, discussion, so that it's easier for the reader to look at result and respective discussion, instead of having it in different chapters. Okay, that's why it is not uncommon for these sections to be combined, but researcher will often use subheading to distinguish between the two. Okay, result and discussion. When formulating the result section, it is important to remember that, okay, the result of the study do not prove anything, okay? You just present the result only. The length of the section is set by the amount and types of data to be reported. So what you need to do is avoid providing data that is not critical to answering the research question, because too much data may overwhelm a reader. Okay, in some cases, for example, you may include the details in the appendix. Okay, now here there are two approaches to organizing your result. That's why I use one or the other. Okay, let's look at these two approaches. Next slide, please. In the first approach, you present a synopsis of the result first. Okay, like the introduction and body, elaborate everything. This is followed by an explanation of all these key findings. In the second approach, you present a result and explain it, and go on until you finish presenting and explaining one after another result, and end with the overall synopsis. Okay, so you can just choose whatever you want. Maybe it depends on the type of data that you are presenting, or it's your personal preference. Okay, the next one. Content of the section, okay? Let's look at it. Now, the first thing that you need to include is the introductory context for understanding the result by restating the research problem underpinning your study. Do you still remember? I said when you talk about chapter structure, right? Each and every chapter of your research dissertation or thesis must have a link in the introduction. You need to link whatever chapter that you are writing with the research problem. okay, or the research question that underpin your study. That's why we need to have the introduction context. And number two, inclusion of the visual presentation such as figure, charts, photo, maps, table, depending on the research data collection method that you use to further illustrate your key finding if appropriate. Another one is a systematic description of your result, highlighting for the reader observation that are most relevant to the topic under investigation. Now, we need to be very, very careful. Do not confuse observation, important finding with interpretation. Here in the result session, we do not include interpretation, okay? Now, the next one, focus only on findings that are important, interesting, or significant, and related to addressing the research problem, although you may want to acknowledge unanticipated results that are not relevant to answering the research question. But you can also include that, but you can mention it, maybe if it is interesting enough, you can mention it for the recommendation for further research in the conclusion section. Now, a short paragraph that concludes the result section by synthesizing the key finding of the study. Highlight in that conclusion short paragraph, highlight the most important finding you want readers to remember, as you might want to transit to the discussion section that follows. That's why normally introduction, you connect with the research problem or question, and in the conclusion, summarize the most important finding and connect it to the next session, that is the discussion section. Okay, that is really important. Now, begin with an introduction. Now, let me just go through it one by one. Begin with an introduction to connect the result with the research question. Why? We need to bring the reader's focus back to the purpose of study after reading the literature review and method section of your paper or your dissertation, okay, or your thesis. Tell the reader what to expect in the following section or subsection. That means you include the outline of your study, outline of your chapter. Now here, this is the example of introductory context. The first objective of the research was to demonstrate that the IRBS and OCBs are separate dimensions of performance, as are OCBIS and OCBOS. As part of this process, a factor analysis was conducted on the performance item. A three-factor model with oblique rotation was examined based on the previous discussion of this and that. That means that they also relate to the research question as well as the method that they use. Then after that, it follows the, as you can say, result. In keeping with the method of FD advocated in this research, the analysis focuses on gender as discussed objective and the ways in which the male-only stereotype is constructed through language. Examples of gender verbal behavior were found in all 10 interviews, okay? Now, this is the introduction. Now, body of the result of finding session, right? Now, you must remember the qualitative and quantitative research session differ. Now, if you look at qualitative research, depend on your chosen qualitative method or method set. You can split theme, discourses, or argument into subsection, which should follow a logical order and flow. Let's say you would like to talk about gender issue or something like that for the discourse analysis, then you may have different themes, okay? Different themes can be you can say headings and a section, and then after that we may have some kind of subsection. Each subsection should have an introduction and a structure in paragraphs, okay? Still, you need to have that kind of paragraphing. Use extract, because if you are using the interview, right, in order for you to provide evidence, the evidence can be extract from your interview or focus group or explanatory pictures which you have analyzed to justify your analysis. Okay, but you must remember when you say pictures, right? Let's say when my PhD student conducted his research on parental involvement, he asked the parents to take photos of the kind of, you can say, aids or anything that they use to help their kids, right? Then he pick and choose some of the pictures, okay? So I focus on the most expressive one. A longer extract have to be highlighted in the text, for example, by indenting or numbering or explaining it. Shorter extract can be put into the main text and become part of your sentence structure, like when you have the in-text citation, okay? On the next slide, please. Now, here is the example. The first paragraph is the introduction, and starting from the second paragraph, we have that kind of subsection, right? And in the beginning, there is an introduction to the subsection and also include the extract from the interview. And after that, referring back again to the extract. That's why this is how we can, you can say, indicate the result section. Next slide, this is another the annotated one. If you look at it here, at the end of the data collection, 131 stakeholders participated in the survey. The respondents were distributed by country as this and that. This is the introductory context, right? And here, right, the results show that for most stakeholders, and then the most important category of the VS is regulating service, important finding, followed by interesting finding, followed by important finding. And after that, at the end, the summary of finding, the results show that the summary of key finding, that means concluding paragraph. There are interesting differences between countries in terms of the level. And then it summarizes the most important point. Okay, so I think this is how you can see it. Now, with regard to quantitative result section, you need to report your statistics and data analysis. The question here is what kind of analysis were conducted, whether it is regression, structural equation, linear model, etc. And report on the outcome of these analysis, which you can include values of tests conducted, degrees of freedom. So for those who are from quantitative research, when I talk about it, you will know that probability, effect size, or confidence interval. Now, another one is because it's quantitative one, you can present them both in text and table or chart form. Why? Because it's clearer for the reader to see. Data can present it in text, table, and chart form. Other aspects which may be included include report on ancillary analysis, any other analysis performed, including subgroup analysis and adjusted analysis, participant flow, baseline data, intervention and manipulation, if there is anything. Okay, next slide. This is the example of quantitative one. I would like you to read. Just try it because the annotation is there. Sorry. Okay, the next slide. Now here, inclusion of visual presentation. These are what we have that, okay? Now, some example. Key result, be careful with the tenses, okay? Key results are reported below, even though the result section is in the past tense. Whenever you describe the chapter and the, you can say, visual, it's all in a simple present tense, only, you can say, yeah, the result is, all the results are in the past tense, okay? But if you look at the last line, right? Incidents shown in figure 1 and 2. Okay, now let's move to the next slide. This is just one example of illustration and table and graph. Now, this is the concluding paragraph example. In all cases, results show that the role of these two types of meaning-related talk in children's vocabulary at 4 years of age did not depend upon children's cognitive skill at 2 years of age, okay? Now, next one. Here, this is what you must remember. Avoid discussing or interpreting your result unless you have a subsection, result session, and discussion session. But in the result session, you only include the result without discussing or interpreting your result. Don't report background information or attempt to explain your finding. Okay. Now, don't ignore negative results. They are important as well. Don't include raw data or intermediate calculation. If raw data is to be included, place it in an appendix, okay? Be careful, and set up appendixes that are referred to in the text. For example, for details, see appendix 1, appendix 2, etc. Be as factual and concise as possible in reporting your finding. Do not use phrases that are vague or non-specific, such as appear to be greater or lesser than, okay? Or promising, demonstrate promising trend, just to be factual and concise, okay? Now, avoid presenting the same data or repeating the same information more than once because we do not have space, okay? If it is important to highlight a particular finding, you will have an opportunity to emphasize the significance in the discussion section. You don't need to repeat that. Only in the discussion section you can say that. Don't confuse figure with table. Figures and tables are different, okay? So you need to be able to label them accurately. The next slide. Okay, these are the references that we have. Now, what time is now? 8. Okay, great. Okay, I think we can move to the next section. Sorry about that, I'm rushing it because if I finish a discussion and everything, we still have introduction and abstract writing as well. Okay, so okay. Any questions? I think we can continue with the discussion. Is it okay with you? Is it too much today? Because actually only when we just include discussion, then it's easier. Let's look at it. Writing discussion. Okay, as I mentioned too, discussion can be in a separate chapter. Discussion and conclusion can be put together. Okay, so what is discussion session? Right, discussion can be combined with the result session, but of course you need to put it under different subsection. What is discussion session? It interprets and describes the significance of your finding in light of what was already known about the research problem being investigated. That means we discuss it in light of the previous literature. It explains any new understanding or insight about the problem after you have taken the finding into consideration. It means that it connects to the introduction in that it explains how your study has moved the reader's understanding of research problem forward from where you left them at the end of the introduction, right? Because I haven't talked about it in the introduction yet, but I'm going to talk about it in the next on next Saturday. Okay, now here, why a good discussion section is significant or important? Because it demonstrates your ability as a researcher to think critically about an issue, to develop creative solutions to problems based upon a logical synthesis of the finding, and to formulate a deeper, more profound understanding of the research problem under investigation. Okay, that's why I think it's very important, because it presents the underlying meaning of your research, note possible implication in other areas of study, and explore possible improvement that can be made in order to further develop the concern of your research. It also highlights the importance of study, its possible contribution to or how it may help fill the existing gap in the field that you have identified in the literature review. Okay, now just no, don't move it yet. I haven't finished explaining yet. Sorry. Okay, now here in this case, it engages the reader in thinking critically about issue based upon an evidence-based interpretation of finding. It is not governed strictly by objective reporting of the information. Result section is the objective reporting of information, whereas here we interpret the finding, you can say, in light of the previous literature. Okay, now let's look at the next slide. Now, what is the content of the, you can say, how it is related. Okay, now, because actually here in this case, right, result or finding of your section and the interpretation of result and findings lead to the discussion of the result and finding. That again lead to the implication, right? You can say your link to the research question or hypothesis in relation to your existing theory and research, and also implication of your finding to other area of, I mean, the bigger research area. That is what the discussion section will do. Now, here in this case, relation to your research question, the first one is you must draw together your research question again and your own research result. Answer the following question. If it is the quantitative research, do your research findings support your initial hypothesis? Why and how? Or else, do your finding only support the hypothesis in part? And why and how? Okay, or in some cases, do your finding disapprove your hypothesis? Why and how? Some people think that, oh, you must prove that your hypothesis is correct. No, you are finding the truth. That's why it doesn't matter your hypothesis is, right or wrong. What else do your finding tell you over and above what you initially set out to investigate? Because in some cases, you might see other things, okay? Now, you need to show your results fit in with other work that has been done in your field. Now, you are to point out the agreement and disagreement between your data and that of data of others. In presenting your own interpretation of the result, consider the strength and weakness of alternative interpretation from the literature as well. Now, you can do this by answering the following question. Which has been done by others? Remind each other. You need to show the link between what you have done and what has been done by other people. Okay, that is how you can relate your research to previous research. Next, please. Now, in terms of implication, right, what kind of impact that your findings may have with on the current theory? Do you add any new things, or do you support or disagree with whatever current theory offers, or any kind of technical applications, or any kind of implication on the professional practice? Let's say if you're looking at the customer, you can dissatisfaction, right? The impact of the English proficiency of the customer service staff on the customer satisfaction. In such a case, it will have the kind of valuable impact or implication on the professional practice that it means that the English proficiency of the customer service need to be upgraded so that you can have the customer satisfaction. Okay, now let's look at the next slide. Structure and writing style. Right? Like, avoid being verbose or repetitive. Be concise and make your points clearly. Avoid using jargon. Interpret and discuss the significance you're finding in the same sequence you described them in your result section. You may remember that for my master thesis, right, I think that it's quite repetitive. That's why I would like to make changes. And what happened was that I got lost. And I discussed with my previous supervisor, and he said that, hey, it's also repetitive. But the current supervisor didn't think so, but I would like to make change. So I finally what I did, it's not the kind of, right, sorry, the result section and discussion of section must be in the same sequence so that it's easier for the reader to follow as well. Okay, that's why I make changes. That's why I think it's easier. Now use the present tense, because when you are presenting your result, it should be in the past tense. But when you are discussing a result, right, use the present tenses, especially for the established facts. But however, refer to specific words or prior study in the past tense, okay? If needed, as I mentioned to you, use subheading to help organize your discussion or to categorize your interpretation into different themes, if it is qualitative one, okay? Now, in terms of organization, right? If you look at the research paper, this is like this. After abstract, introduction, start with the general one, and we narrow it down, okay? And method, okay, specific, and result specific. But discussion, what is really happening is that it should be general, because you also need to relate it to the previous research, relevant research, and you also need to relate it to the implication to the existing theory and method or professional practice. That's why it become the, you can say, general one. Okay, now please The next slide. In terms of content, just still remember, let me just repeat that, because whatever chapter that you write must relate to your research problem or research question. Okay, that's why reiterate the research problem or state the major finding. Explain the meaning of the finding and why they are important, and relate the finding to similar study. That means previous research, and you can also consider alternative explanation of the findings. And here, you must acknowledge the study limitations, right? But don't feel disappointed, because after stating the limitation in your conclusion, you can also include the recommendation of further research, because this is what you cannot do in your research study. That's why, you can recommend it for further research and make suggestion for further research. Okay, next slide, please. Now, statement of the results. Okay, here, when you state, briefly reiterate the research problem or problems you are investigating and the method you use to investigate them. Then move quickly to describe the major finding of the study from the previous section. And after that, you discuss. You should write a direct, declarative, and succinct proclamation of the study result, usually in just one paragraph. That is not because you already have the detail in the previous chapter or section. Now, when you explain the result, that is where you have the discussion, right? Systematically explain the underlying meaning of your findings and state why you believe they are significant. You justify it. If applicable, begin this part of the section by repeating what you consider to be your most significant or unanticipated finding first, then systematically review each finding and discuss it, okay? Otherwise, follow the general order you reported the finding in the result section, okay? Now, here, in this case, whenever you would like to refer to previous research, compare your result with the finding from previous studies cited in your literature review, or use these studies to support your claim. If your research has any significant or anticipated finding, which is not reported in any previous research, you need to explain why it was significant or unanticipated. It's very important, okay? Now, in terms of language, use the first person to describe your finding. You claim your ownership, okay? My data shows, this is what you have done, right? Consistently use this, refer to your own research and refer to previous research by name, place, or time. For example, this study means your own research. The finding of this research. And when you would like to refer to other people's research, include the name or place or time. Smith and Gilbert found that a previous study in way. Okay. Now, here in this case, make reference to similarity or differences in approach of finding. Similar research carried out in the 1980s show that, because you would like to relate your findings with previous research. Now, here about the tense, right? Use the present perfect tense to highlight the recent relevance of your research in comparison with earlier research, referring to it in the simple past. Look at it. This study has shown, present perfect, a prevalence rate of 2.5, which is greater than that Smith and Gilbert found in their study. Okay. Now, whenever you indicate the alternative explanation, right? The purpose of the research in social science is to discover and not to prove. Okay, for those who are in social science, our purpose is to discover. Okay. Now, when writing the discussion, that fit your hypothesis or prior assumptions or biases. Okay, this is especially important when describing the discovery of significant or unanticipated findings. Can you hear me well? Okay, now here in this case, cautious language and hedging. Because whenever you discuss, right, it is your interpretation, which may or may not be the same as other people. So in that case, discussing result and drawing conclusion involves making claims about interpretation, significance, and applicability. Right? That's why in that case, you must remember that existing knowledge is always being modified in the light of new result. Okay, so in that case, right, when you interpret, right, look at it, that's why you need to use that cautious language or hedging. Whatever claim that you make, it must be specific and precise and supported with evidence. Okay, now in that case, if you are certain about it, you can use now the language you use as a researcher must distinguish carefully between knowledge you are sure of because you have a reliable evidence for it, and other knowledge you are less sure of, and other knowledge you think is only within the realms of possibility. For the last two cases, hedging is a language that you can use, a type of language used which protects your claim to prevent you from overclaiming a point. Using language as a suitable amount of caution can protect your claims from being easily dismissed. It's also have to indicate the level of certainty we have in relation to the evidence of support. Let's look at some example. There's some works fully devoted to hedging. That's why you may want to have a look at it, okay? Now look at these two texts and see what difference here is. The first one is extensive reading helps students to improve their vocabulary. There is no evidence, okay? Now, here in this case, research conducted by Yan appears to indicate that. Now, if you look at it here, appears to indicate. If you say indicate that, it's a fact, but appears to indicate that it's a kind of hedging. For a significant proportion of students, extensive reading may contribute. It doesn't say contribute, may contribute, it shows the possibility to an improvement in the active vocabulary. Yan's study involved learners aged 15 to 16 in the UK, although it may be applicable to other groups. However, the study involved an opt-in sample, which means that sample student may have been more keen or more involved. That means there may be some biases, but the use of may have been more keen or more involved in reading already. It would be useful to see whether the findings differ in a wider sample. Okay, so you can see very clear. Now, move to the acknowledgement or limitation. As I mentioned to you, right? Note an unanswered question or issue your study did not address and describe the generalizability of your result to other situations. If a limitation is applicable to the method chosen to gather information, then describe in detail the problems that you encounter and why. Okay, so I don't be shy to acknowledge your limitation. Now, in conclusion, that is the conclusion, right? A concise summary of the principal implication of the finding regardless of the significance. A brief explanation about why you believe the finding and conclusion of your study are important and how they support broader knowledge or understanding of the research problem. And link with your limitation, you can also include recommendations for further research, highlighting other questions related to the problem that remain unanswered, or linking the need for further research to the limitation of your study, or to critical issues revealed from the data that were not considered initially in your research. Okay. Now, here I will just include the phrases for hedging. Look at it here. In terms of verb, we can use appear, seem, look, then. I would like you to look at the example. I am not going to read it out. Okay, even though my focus is on writing, but yeah, just by looking at the examples, you can always, you can say, use that as a reference point. Okay, the next one is suggest, indicate, estimate, contribute, and help. Okay. The use of verb and what the kind of meaning that they carry, so that you can see the degree of uncertainty. Okay. Now, another one is use of the modal auxiliaries. Okay. Especially can, could, may, might. Okay. Now, the use of it is the preparatory 'it' clause. Okay. Next slide. Depending on the certainty or uncertainty level, you can use different adjective. Now here, a list of the adverbs, some examples, okay? Now another one is use of quantifier, okay? That is also hedging, okay? Now here, if you look at it here, these are the example of the use of the adverb that I included in the previous slides, okay? Use of, you can say it's a mixture of use of the adverb, okay? And also the, you can say the use of the auxiliary and use of the adverb, right? Or suggest, That's why we can say that we can use more than one, you can say strategy of hedging in one sentence. Okay, depending on how certain you are, how you do protect claim. Okay. I was simply kicked out of this. Okay, now I think that's the end of my session for today. So I think because it seems like I ran a marathon methodology, research, and discussion sessions, 3 sections all together. But I think the most difficult one is the literature review one. The rest is quite straightforward. Okay, that's why if you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, teacher. Yeah, so like the other days, it's a great session, and I think many of us have learned many important things from you. And so far, okay, I can see there's a question. Is there a YouTube link? Okay, yes, of course, we are going to upload. Okay, we have uploaded the 2 other sessions already, and as we are going to upload tonight's session as well. Okay, as soon as possible, once we have done the editing. Yeah, so in the next week. Yes, not right after, 1 minute after this session, but we are going to upload it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you. So if you have any questions, any comments, you can have your mic on and talk to us. Yes.
Okay, what are needed to point out in presenting the analysis of each term in a paragraph? Okay, what are needed to point out? Analysis. Okay, as I mentioned to you in the results section, right? When you put down, you have to include the most significant findings, right? Interesting one, relevant one. So when you discuss it, it depends because I have given you 2 approach, right? One approach is start with this hypnosis and then after that, elaborate them. Okay. And another one is start with the each finding and only at the end we have the kind of synopsis. No. Okay.
Thank you. And we will also send we have sent some documents shared by Dr. KKE, and we will also share them again when we have completed all the 4 sessions to everyone. Yes.
Okay.
And there's a YouTube link given in the chat box, and you can click on it and you can subscribe yourself for the YouTube videos there. Yeah, okay, we have got another question from Miss Tessie. Madam, do you have a pattern in presenting the analysis for each datum in a paragraph? And Dr. Tessie from the Philippines. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Tessie. Do you have a pattern in presenting the analysis? Okay, as I mentioned to you, when you present the analysis, right? Like, let's say, first thing, right? Because actually in the result section, what we normally include is the result and analysis of the data. Okay, so in that case, what we normally include is that we include the raw result in the first paragraph, and analysis part would be in the second paragraph without interpreting it. Okay, so that is what we normally do. So I normally the results followed by the analysis. Okay, because it's combined in a way. Whenever you report it, even though when we put it result, in fact, it is the analysis of your data. Oh, right. That's why that's what I'm trying to answer, but I'm not quite sure whether I'm answering your question well. Okay, in brief, what separates theoretical framework or conceptual framework, and is there a point of correlation? Yes. Okay, now whenever we talk about theoretical framework and conceptual framework, okay, especially with regard, right? Normally, conceptual framework is derived from the theoretical framework. But again, right, we have the theoretical framework, we might modify because based on that theoretical framework itself is a big one, for example. In such a case, there may be a kind of area we'd like to explore. That's why what we need to do is that based on that theoretical framework, we can build the conceptual framework. I hope Mr. Joseph and Gina, have I answered your question satisfactorily? Okay.
Thank you.
New message. Okay. Sometimes it's a very Dr. Tessie. How do you react on my own pattern? Present the dictum, its meaning, its significance, its implication, and finally, what are needed? Okay. Now, its implication, but as I mentioned to you, you also need to include the limitation of your research, right? Based on your limitation and whatever you find, you can also include the recommendation for further research, right? In some cases, some people include all the details for further research because they look at the, we look at their own limitation of the research. Sometimes maybe in terms of the sample size or sometimes the context of study itself. So we may want to recommend further research to be conducted in different contexts. Okay, in some cases, use different methods, or sample size. Maybe the problem is that it is very difficult for you to collect data, right? That's why you may recommend, further research to use a bigger sample size, something like that. That's why I think that is what you can do. Okay, when you say implication, that's why you can include implication for the existing theory, right, on which your research was based, or you may want to connect it to other, you can say theories, because actually when we say language study, for example, right, it is linked to several different areas. That's why you can have different implication for several different existing theories. Okay, and also the professional practice and everything, right, that you can include as well. Okay. I'm not quite sure whether I answered the question satisfactorily. Okay, now 9 new message.
Well, we are the messages, the reminders for the participants
Okay.
to fill in the form, the evaluation form.
Okay, is there any book you want to recommend regarding the determination of sample size? Okay, there are some authority in the field with regard to methodology, research methodology. So I think maybe at the end of the last session, I think I may be able to, or maybe within this week, I can pass the list, reference list to our team members. Okay, then they can send the list to all of you. I mean, that is how we can, but there may be a lot out there because there's so many books published. Some of them are, you can say, new edition of the same author. We still have some more new researchers. So let me have a look at the list, and I can send you the list of these books on research methodology. Some concentrate on quantitative only, some you can say qualitative one, some mixed method. Presswell is the person I think who is really authority in the mixed method approach. Okay, so I think yeah. Okay.
So, dear teachers, are you able to log on to this Google form for evaluation and certification? So far, 65 of you have filled in the form, but there are over 100. So we will wait until everyone has finished.
Okay, may I say a few words of thanks to Teacher Kin?
Thanks.
I would like
Thank you.
I would like to take some time to extend my gratitude towards your time and your expertise in research writing, teacher. I found your practical tips and strategies in improving the research writing skills for me, as well as for the other teachers in this meeting room. And what I learned about your research writing for today is research writing methodology, data collection methods, qualitative, quantitative, and also the importance of collecting data and analysis as well. Moreover, we have learned a lot about the details of qualitative and quantitative results and findings, teacher. Thank you so much for these. And we are very eager to learn for the next week, and we are very excited to learn new things in coming Saturday as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very
teacher.
much for kind words, and thank you very much for paying attention to what I was just trying to just, bombard you with so many things at the same time because of the time constraint as well. Yeah. I would like to share so many things with you.
Yeah. Thank you. We are looking forward to it. And there are two questions. One from teacher talking to Wayne, and she is saying, thank you very much, teacher. If you recommend some books for us, would you mind suggesting some statistics as well, please?